With the coronavirus pandemic, the National Folk Festival will be offering up a virtual event on September 12th and 13th. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. Pandemic has shut down many events this year, and so it is with the National Folk Festival, at least the in-person kind. Instead, the festival will be launching a virtual display of past and original recordings on Delmarva Public Media and its social media websites. Last year drew more than 150,000 attendees and over 350 artists featured at 7 outdoor stages. But concern of the virus has moved the festival to the virtual world. Talk about what led up to this decision and what to expect. We have on the phone with us Lora Bottinelli, the Executive Director of the National Council for the Traditional Arts. And welcome to the program.
Glad to be here, Don.
So why don't you start first with how this decision came about? Obviously, a lot of other folks have come to the same decision with their own events, but give me some sense about when you guys finally decided you couldn't go through with at least the in-person form of this.
Well, this is going back a little earlier in 2020. In March, we all found ourselves in quarantine and quickly began to realize that the forecast for 2020 was not going to be ideal for getting 150,000 people together. And so by the end of April, we had made our public announcement. The National Folk Festival leadership team had gotten together and weighed all the pros and cons of trying to proceed with what we knew at that time with an in-person gathering. And it was clear for a number of reasons that suspending those plans for 2020 was the best route. So that way, potentially, we could celebrate the 80th National Folk Festival together in 2021. And so since we've done that at the end of April, we've been pivoting to coming up with this virtual celebration. And I know that's what we're going to talk a little bit more about today.
So, as a matter of fact, how did the idea of constructing this virtual event come about, and what kind of platforms are we looking at? What kind of audience do you think there's going to be?
So, yeah, it's been all summer long. It's really been evolving. We've watched a number of our peer festivals put together virtual festival performances using radio, other online platforms. So we've had the benefit of seeing a few of these go through very successfully with some of our partner festivals. And so as we were looking ahead to September, we know we wanted to leverage our very strong social media presence that the National Folk Festival enjoyed in its 2 years in Salisbury. And then, of course, using the public radio platform through your institution to be able to do some broadcasts of past performances over your radio airwaves. So the online experience will be very interactive. It's going to have a rich variety of new content, which we can talk about. And as you know, on Delmarva Public Media on Saturday and Sunday from 12 to 3, we'll be rebroadcasting some of the performances from the past National Folk Festivals in Salisbury, including commentary and interviews with Nick Spitzer of American Roots and some of the past festival performers. So it's really going to be a robust dual platform experience with the public radio and with the online social experience.
By the way, how is your old stomping grounds, the Ward Museum, going to be involved in all of this?
Oh, well, they actually have been leading the pack with some of the digital programming related to the National Folk Festival. Your listeners have been listening to Chesapeake Traditions Today, a weekly series that has been spotlighting tradition bearers from the Eastern Shore, many of them who were featured in the year one of our National Folk Festival in Salisbury in the Chesapeake Traditions program. So we heard from, oyster shuckers, Smith Island cake makers, the Nassawawash Band of Indians, and other tradition bearers of the shore through that program. So that radio program your listeners have been enjoying, there are now video vignettes that are available for each of those tradition bearers, and they will be featured on Saturday during the online stream on our Facebook page and on nationalfolkfestival.com. And so we feel that's a really important way to bring the local culture into what is going to be basically a national showcase of traditional arts and culture through the National Folk Festival.
And also you indicate there's going to be some kind of family activities. What's that about?
Yes. As you know, the National Folk Festival, we have many different ways to engage our public. And so, for example, the Red Trouser Show, which was a juggling and performance group, they put together a special family area activity that will air for us on, I believe, September 12th. And then a few of our local presenting organizations will have other family area activities tucked into the stream during the weekend. All of those activities and the schedule will be published basically by the minute next week, the week of the festival. So that way, if you are looking to specifically focus in on the family area activities, or there's a particular artist that you want to make sure you don't miss, you will be able to kind of have almost the minute-by-minute layout of what will come through that stream over the weekend.
And I guess you have, I mean, some of the acts that I think I've seen listed as, I think it's bluegrass, Creole jazz, that kind of thing. Give us a sense about the variety that you're looking at and how you decide which ones to sort of bring back, because you have a whole host of them over the last couple of years.
So, well, and designing the programming for the virtual festival, we were sensitive to that, when we did cancel for 2020, that we were already booked with artists who we hope to be able to showcase in person in 21. We had a number of other activities that we were sort of pivoting and rescheduling some of our artist engagements. And then, of course, those artists that do speak to a lot of the interests of Salisbury. So who's coming forward for the virtual celebration also matches what we've seen with our artists and who's been doing a lot of virtual activities successfully. It is a very hard and creative pivot that these artists have had to make in order to present themselves well and strong in a virtual format. So our selections were sensitive to a variety of those issues. But for instance, Los Pleneros de la 21, who is a Bomba y Plena group from New York, have been doing some really impressive engagements virtually. There'll be a first-time view for many of our Salisbury viewership. The Fidel Band, which is an Ethiopian jazz-based ensemble based in Washington, D.C. It'll be the first time that our National Folk Festival viewers in Salisbury will meet them. But then old favorites like people who enjoyed Hot Club of Cowtown last year in person will be doing a performance with us. And Jerry Douglas, the master dobro player from Nashville, Tennessee, will be making a performance. So it's really a wide variety of traditional arts and culture bearers, and of trying to find something that kind of speaks to, of course, this very the richness and variety of American culture, which is the goal of the National Folk Festival, is to really give a lens into many of the rich cultural communities throughout the United States. And we think we have pulled that off with what you're going to experience in the virtual celebration.
Now, I understand, by the way, you have a documentary on the 80-year history of the festival. Describe a little bit about that, but did you learn something from that as well?
Well, when we went into 2020, for the 80th planning, that was planned as a retrospective documentary. And what we've decided to do is it's a sneak peek, a preview to what will be published as a full documentary in 21. We're focusing on the National Folk Festival experience in Salisbury with that about 15-minute documentary program. And you'll hear voices from the Salisbury community speaking about the impact of the festival experience, and how it's been transformative, and the way that it's able to create these moments of social cohesion and understanding and transmission. So when we think about that documentary, I just want our listeners and viewers to know that it's a preamble to when we come together for the 80th and us publishing the documentary about the full scope of the history of the National. But in putting that documentary together, and one of the reasons we held back on leading into publishing the full piece, is that what we're going to experience between 2020 and 2021 for the National Folk Festival, for the city of Salisbury, for all the United States, is going to be a really transformative year when we think about how communities get together, how these events are important to our social fabric, and with the continuing challenges of coronavirus, what does our experience in 2021 look like? We have the additional factor for Salisbury with Mayor Day being deployed on active duty and away from the community for the majority of 2020. And, our optimism that 21, when we're all gathering together in person, Mayor Day will be back in Salisbury. So that aspect of the storyline for the national, obviously nothing like that has happened before either. So we feel as though pulling that whole story together for the documentary in September of 21 will be a very important punctuation, not only for the city of Salisbury, but for the National Folk Festival and its future.
By the way, speaking of the documentary, was there anything about it that you learned about the festival that perhaps you didn't know before? I mean, I guess you've been in the job for about a year or so. What's anything that strikes you about the character of this festival?
Well, I continue in my experience with NCTA, the National Council for the Traditional Arts, to be just really honored and deeply moved by how generous everyone is in sharing their cultural perspectives in an effort to create a better understanding of the complexities of our diverse communities and how seeing and knowing one another is ultimately creating a much more healthy and inclusive picture of American culture. And so our tradition bearers and artists as ambassadors of their cultural communities, and then for our host community of Salisbury, how welcoming and how deep those interactions have been, and how it basically has shaped our years to come in the way that we honor and create inclusive and equitable arts experiences both locally and nationally.
By the way, how do you see this festival fitting into the times we live in? I think I saw a quote from you which said that essentially that the festival celebrates what we have in common, not what separates us. It is building trust and understanding while connecting us to the past as well as to the future. What significance do you attach to this festival, particularly in these very difficult times?
Well, I mean, what is shared is at the heart of what the National Folk Festival tries to do. I mean, the cultural communities that we work with are so diverse and complex, and the cultural traditions of the millions of American people who are stewarding their traditions and their connections to their personal identity, their community identity, and how they see themselves as part of a broader public. It's going to play a central role in the future health of American communities. We know that stewarding and sustaining traditions is a way for people to not only connect themselves to one another, to themselves in the future, but then also to be able to meet people and understand how their cultural background has informed their life and trajectory, and that these things can be complementary and enriching and deepening to all of us as we find our way forward. It is an extremely challenging time in American culture, and we find that showcasing these cultural traditions and understanding the hearts of the American people in its very diverse and beautiful forms is one way for people to see each other and build a better understanding.
Now, this will be actually the third year that the festival has been in Salisbury, although it won't be physically here, and we'll have another year next year. What kind of impact do you see this festival having on the region?
Well, we already know that the two in-person years, and speaking just to 2019, the $46 million long-term economic impact that the in-person event had was obviously substantial. And as we think about the virtual celebration and looking ahead to 21, as the city of Salisbury, is reopening and, beginning to have smaller engagements over potentially the course of 2020 and 21, having the economic impacts that come from that type of activity, it will be so important for that to become another a regular part of the economic future of the city. And how the National Folk Festival plays into that and the scope and visibility of that engagement, we would hope it's playing a similar role as it had done in its first 2 years. But again, the cultural cohesion that happens, the big lift that the community does in order to make an event like this successful, is very unifying and healing, and the can-do attitude. So not to speak too much on how your community is facing and recovering and responding to the challenges that has been facing it, but I've been so impressed by the tenacity and transparency and communications that the city has shared with its residents and the wider community. So the collective efforts to be able to do something like the National Folk Festival again in 21, I'm optimistic that we will be able to design it in a way where it has as many healthy outcomes as possible for the community, and those healthy outcomes are on multiple levels, whether it's economic, social, cultural, and then of course just the basics of keeping visitors safe. We won't make plans for the 21 festival until at least early in 21 to figure out what the scope of what we're doing is. There is just too much uncertainty right now about how these large mass gatherings will come back into the fold, not only in Salisbury but within the nation and in performing arts. So we're on a wait and see to see what will really be offered in 21, but we hope it will be able to continue to, again, have those healthy impacts that I was just talking about.
What was some of the major challenges to putting together this virtual version of the National Folk Festival?
Well, I'll speak to the example of one of our partner organizations, the Maryland State Arts Council and Maryland Traditions. Every year we showcase the master apprenticeship teams from the State Folklife program on site at the National Folk Festival. And so this year, in order to showcase those master apprenticeship teams, they all had to be filmed virtually. All of the artists did self-documentation, interviews through Zoom, and then they're been knitted together into these 7-minute vignettes that are trying to capture the depth of that master artist team and their tradition that they're stewarding. And being able to produce those types of high quality virtual format media productions in such a short time frame, and knowing that the technologies of many of our tradition bearers is varied, the access to broadband and internet, not only other types of high quality technology, it is a struggle. And we know that residents are facing this now, whether they're dealing with virtual school or their own personal experiences. But for artists now, looking as these screens being one of their only way to deliver their life's work, and overcoming those technical challenges has been a part of our entire experience with the virtual celebration. And we've been successful in supporting the artists to be able to present them best selves in the virtual celebration. But that will continue to be a struggle as it is now, the longer that we are relying solely on these virtual platforms to deliver the depth and variety of traditional culture that we present at the National.
Do you think, by the way, that this experience with the virtual world is going to change or add to what you may do, say, in the years coming, in terms of not only reaching out to the people, obviously, who come to the festival and so on, and of course we broadcast it on our radio stations and other media outlets, but it seems to me that like many institutions, not only in terms of them adapting to this virtual world, but they're actually finding ways to communicate and expand their presence in terms of an audience.
Well, absolutely. The National Folk Festival, the National Council for the Traditional Arts, we have been highly reliant on the in-person experience as a way to share the depths of what we're presenting. And having that completely removed and turning solely to a virtual presentation has made us realize that there's an aspect of that engagement that we can incorporate into the future, even if we are coming together. It has also allowed us to tap our archives here much more deliberately, because the National Council for the Traditional Arts Archives, I mean, it has materials that go back to the 30s. We've been recording our festival experiences consistently since the late 50s. And so knowing that those materials are available and of interest, and can add to the understanding of the in-person activities that we're presenting potentially in the future, it definitely has opened our eyes to a way to engage and cultivate audience and communities that will shape our work to come. And also just the sheer levels of access. That our artist communities who may be far and wide throughout the country, that have their own listenership and fan base, who maybe weren't able to come to the Delmarva Peninsula on September, the second weekend in September, but now have access to the event. How do we can maintain that level of access in the future? We know that this content is enriching, rewarding, and can shape a very positive future. So having it limited to these in-person interactions, when we think to the future, there's no reason that we shouldn't be finding ways to make more access virtually.
Well, in terms of going forward, one of the questions, I guess, becomes, and I think you've sort of tried to address it, but what happens if the pandemic continues to be as it is now? Perhaps we might get a second wave. They've talked a great deal about that. And even with vaccines, we're looking at maybe they might be helpful, but that we still may be in a sort of semi-lockdown, or at least limited interaction with others. How do you then go forward? Have you guys been thinking about that? What kind of things might you resort to if indeed we are where we are a year from now?
Well, knowing our experience in 2020, that if we are unable to gather in person, that we now have this experience of the virtual celebration, and we will learn a lot from it. We know that we can continue to deliver the positive message and content that the festival brings. Not being able to gather in 21 obviously would be very disappointing, but if it's the ultimate reality, I think there's a point where there's acceptance, and that you need to be able to create as safe and engaged experiences as we can. It's one of the reasons we're waiting until January to assess what our options are. There's so much that needs to be known about the trajectory of the virus, and it's just too soon to be sort of speculating on the what ifs. So I hate to dodge, but we intentionally left this time to see if things get sorted out a bit and we have a better, cleaner picture of what 21 is going to look like.
Well, let me ask you this. So if we were forced to, say, go virtual again in 2021, what does it mean in terms of Salisbury and its custodianship of the festival? Does it then move on, or what's the thinking there? Because it was for 3 years here, and obviously at the time it was an in-person event. We've now sort of pushed it back so that it will be at least scheduled to be in Salisbury in 2021. But if we wind up being virtual, what does that mean for Salisbury?
Yeah, it's a great question, and the National, in the way it's designed with a 3-year residency and the selection of a new host city, obviously we've never had an interruption like what we're experiencing here in 2020, and still some uncertainty for 21. We haven't mapped out what would happen if we weren't able to gather again in 21. It would be a conversation with obviously the various leadership teams and the interests of the host community, and what seems like the best approach. We've been adjusting to the times as we can. The National can be a nimble event to bring to the communities what those communities need at that point in time. And it has been part of trajectories of recovery and resiliency for our host communities before. again, never facing something like what we're going through in 2020. We know that the National can really be a leveraging point for our host community. So I would look forward to talking to the city of Salisbury if we should find ourselves in that place and figure out what is the best path forward. For an event that is celebrating its 80th, we know that we will carry it forward, and just with everything, never really seeing something like this in this basically in the American experience. We'll have to look at those questions as they come.
Well, so let's assume that, for instance, we may have the event and so on, and it moves on. Obviously, it's going to move on sometime. So what is then the responsibility of a place like Salisbury to carry on this tradition as it has done in other towns?
Oh, so in the pre-coronavirus era, the design is that the National is in a host community for 3 years, and then it moves on, and the host community maintains its own traditional arts celebration. For the city of Salisbury, that's been designed as the Maryland Folk Festival, and obviously the plans for the Maryland Folk Festival are subject to whatever happens with the tenure of the National. But I have not seen any changes of commitment or interest in, again, once it's safe to gather, that an event of this type and scope and cultural impact would not be desirable for Salisbury. So I think it's the coming soon Maryland Folk Festival is something to know is still what would take place once the National does eventually move to its next host city. But, we are all a very friendly and amenable group of people who are facing the reality of what's in front of us, and we will just adjust the plans as they need to be for the success of our host community.
So you obviously, as most people know, were in charge of the Ward Museum. So you miss us at all?
Oh, very much so. Not being on the shore during times like this, where obviously the access to the natural environment and all the various beautiful lifeways of the shore has been a change. And my heart does go out and hello to my friends at the Ward Museum of Wildfowl Art, Salisbury University, watching them dealing with their reopening and all of their pivots to the virtual environment. The team under Dr. Kristen Sullivan has been responding tremendously to the challenges of the situation, and they've also been creating some really beautiful programming. So yes, I miss you, and I'm also very proud to see how everyone is rising to the challenges of this year, and for the Ward, how they've been able to really bring an important piece of content with Chesapeake Traditions Today into the National Folk Festival for the virtual celebration.
So are we going to see you back on the shore
anytime soon?
I hope so. We're still not traveling much, but yeah, as soon as it's the opportunity comes, that would be the plan. At some point, we'll be able to stand in a room together, Don.
Really?
Maybe.
Well, with virtual room at any event, right?
That's right. That's right.
By the way, just one question: is there anything in particular that you miss on the shore?
I joke about this, but not being able to get to a Smith Island cake whenever I want is a challenge. And over here on the Western Shore, even like seafood, you guys probably, I hope, are still having a pretty reliable access to locally sourced seafood. But once you get over here, it's harder. So, thinking with my belly,
right.
And of course everyone, my friends and neighbors and colleagues that just when you can walk around the downtown and run into basically, people you've known for decades, that's not really happening right now in quarantine. So.
Well, we wish you the best of luck. We've been talking with Lora Bottinelli. She's the Executive Director of the National Council for the Traditional Arts. Appreciate you stopping by and chatting with us this morning.
Thank you, Don. Take care.
And you too. This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.